Hey everybody, and welcome back to another tier list video. And today we're gonna take a look at the logistics tab. This time around, however, I will not mention each unit individually. Previously I've mentioned every single hawk, etc. if I rated them. This time around I will not, because there are so many units that, even if their stats are slightly different, are virtually identical, most notably when it comes to command jeeps and certain command infantry. And as such, there's this note that some units I will just mention or rate under an umbrella term, such as command jeeps. However, some of those units that would fall under this term, in this case the BY5020 TSL, the Chinese boat jeep, this one here, even though it would still fall under this term, I will still rate this individually, because this is much better than other Jeep CVs. So yeah, just to make things easier. Plus, I think this is possibly the most boring tab anyways, so I will definitely try to get this done in one video. While there certainly are some interesting units, I think the vast majority here are not that interesting. And one of those majorities are helicopters. Yes, there are differences in between them. I will, though, put them all into E tier, and to make things easier, I will just click the check mark and put them all. And I'm just to make sure. Usually, in the other cases, I will not do this. But when it comes to command helicopters, nope. You can meme around with them, but you always have better choices. And even Jeep CVs, which I'm not really a huge fan of, use them instead. Again, you can do some meme stuff, and I admit, there may be some strategy here or there where, yes, it might be beneficial to actually use a command helicopter, but realistically speaking, whenever you have access to a command helicopter, you will also have access to an infantry CV in a helicopter, and in that case, that is just better. Okay, very good optics aside, just don't use them. And if you meme around with them or something, go ahead. I'm not telling you what to do, but if you want to try hard, at least to a certain extent, or play seriously, do not use command helicopters. It's all I can recommend. But in the end, just do what you want to do. And BJ212 is just a stat copy. I don't think, is it literally a USC or just a stat copy? I think it's a slightly different vehicle. It's not a USC, but I think stat-wise it is just it's a copy. Jeep CVs. There are situations where I can see people using Jeep CVs, and there are situations where I will use the Jeep CVs myself. However, I still try to avoid them very much. 5 is not necessarily that I have no armor, but having only 5 HP is such a massive... Hold on one second. Such a massive disadvantage. Let me quickly do something. Yes, they're just so squishy. The Humvee, which is not mentioned under the umbrella term, for example, Jeep CVs, is, for example, a much different, a much better unit. And here we have the BY 5020 TSL, which, before I go into, let me actually quickly check something. I wanted to check mobility, because I believe Jeep CVs will get a bigger speed penalty off-road or in forests or both than other wheeled vehicles. They have a different moving type than other non-amphibious wheeled vehicles. So this is why, unless I can, no, they have the same moving type. I'm wrong. So they don't take as much of a speed penalty as like 5-point trucks do. Sorry for the scuffedness once again. But they actually don't they take the same speed penalty as, let's say, an XA180 in the forest. Of course, they have a lower base speed, I think, but back to this. The good thing here is that at least it's amphibious. You only get 4 per card. This one is 6 per card. This one is 4. In Red Dragon, so you get 5. So that's good enough. And honestly, just the amphibious capability, and of course, on top of that, having higher base speed, it's not only worth 10 points. Just on certain maps can massively help with the survivability. On D-Day, for example, there's a not every map has them, but there are some maps where you can put your CVs in rivers or something. It's not a huge thing in 1 versus 1, so you don't have many opportunities there. But especially in team games, there are numerous locations and maps where the amphibious capability really helps. BMD line, always go for the BMD 2K if you go for one. I mean, the thing with most IFVs, these type of stuff is not they're a tad more expensive, but the bigger deal is just you get a much lower availability than on Jeeps. You get only 4 base per card. I think there's no armored CV where you get more than 4 per card without availability bonus. And that is what holds most of them down. Not all of them, but most. And that's why most of them aren't really better than C tier. The autocannon certainly helps with the survivability and self-defense, and nearly every CV, with a few exceptions where you can just effed up, I believe, get medium optics, which also helps. I think they're both just C tier though. Like I said, I would go for the BMD 2 over the BMD 1. But yeah, BMP 1K is virtually the same thing. It's actually a bit worse. Honestly, I think I will rate this worse. I will rate this D tier. D tier, why? It has only 1 side armor. Why is this important? If your CV gets shelled by artillery or something, of course against cluster, the only thing that matters is your top armor. But cluster has really fallen out of favor, even artillery. So the only one that you really somewhat regularly encounter or can expect to encounter if you see the deck is the Smirch. You see the Mars every now and then. The Norwegian LRM basically never, unless you're playing against Norway specifically. The UK one you also never see because nobody plays Commonwealth or UK. So the Mars is the only one you see every now and then when you play against Landshut or Dutch German, where they might want to use this. In France, Eurocore, I should say, people will just use the LRM. So this is why defending or having to fear, I guess you could say, cluster MLRS is not an important cluster. I would even go so far to say you see more cluster bombers than cluster MLRS, because it's sort of like a tech against smoke usage if you have access to good cluster planes. But why one side armor? Well, you have to look at that way. If HE artillery shoots at you, right? I actually don't know, but I don't believe so, that they can hit multiple parts with the same shell, I guess you could say. So you can't. I don't think they can hit side and rear, but someone educate me if I'm wrong, please. But I'm just gonna go on the assumption that they can only hit one part at the same time. So they're gonna hit front, side, back, or top. Most IVs have at least front 2. This guy's even front 3. So that's one side. And from experience, I think we can also say that hitting the top armor is actually fairly rare for HE artillery, unless they're very, very accurate or very lucky. Because, of course, most of the time you just get hit by splash damage on the outside around it. So let's say 90-ish% of the time you're not gonna hit at the top. Front armor protects against 1 of 4 sides. Side armor against 2 of the 4 sides, right? And the difference between 1 and 2 side armor is of course massive. 2 side armor gives you one armor means you take full HE damage, no matter what it is, outside of small arms. 2 side armor reduces HE damage by 60%, or 2 armor in general. 3 armor by I don't know, 80, 90. You only really have to take into account or remember 2 armor. Of course, it also helps massively against AP compared to 1 armor, but especially against HE, that 2 armor is a big survivability boost. And if you have only 3 front or only more than 1 front, then you only really get extra protection against HE from the front, which is like 1/4 of the sides, right? The BMD line, they only take full damage at top or rear, which is, let's say, let's be generous and say 30% of the time. So this is a massive, massive survivability loss compared to the BMDs. In this case, I would even go so far to use Jeeps over the BMP1 because there you get availability. I'll get to this later again, but you know, just because they're in D tier doesn't mean that you should never run them. But again, I'll get to that later. It's a bit weird with the Jeeps. T-72, solid tank CV. Good armor. 3 back is not as big of not that high. Again, you should when you look at the tank CVs or survival vehicle CVs, you want to look at the armor. Tanks, the gun of course sometimes can play a role, but you know I would always go for armor over weaponry, unless you know the TAD UK, but it's a different scenario. Speed is also important because you want to evade bombers, especially stuff like F-111Cs or Nighthawks, stuff like that. So speed is also important. But both, of course, is ideal. The T-72 for 150 points has decent armor. 6 side isn't the best, but you know it is good. 11 front is more than enough. 13 would of course be great because it means you would always be able to at least survive 1 shot from a tank up front at full HP. But once again, the main enemies of CVs are bombers and then followed by infantry sneaking around. In which case, of course, the armor also helps, and that's where side armor also comes into play. But this is a solid tank speed. 150 is somewhat on the expensive side. You get 3 per card, like most tank CVs. And I think that's really all there is to say. It's solid, nothing groundbreaking. This is just a bit weird with the ranking, right? Because the T-72 fills a different role most of the time than the BMD-1. The BMD-1s, or BMD-2s, let's say, or like the IFVs. The IFVs fill the role of like your fairly affordable, you know, all-around CVs, whatever, and the T-72 is the frontline CV, right? So they do kind of fill different roles. Same with the Jeep CVs, right? They do fill different roles in like tank CVs, which is why their rating should be viewed, the rating of those two types of units should be viewed at individually in a vacuum, no, without the other one. It's rarely that you have to decide between a T-72, putting in your deck a T-72 or a Jeep CV. So I will take that into account. I'll probably put a note under it later on. So where do we put a T-72? I think it's an alright tank CV, but once again, nothing really groundbreaking. Maybe it's B tier, you know, one of those things that maybe I'll take a look at it later. T-80 UK is unique. Of course, you know, it can be a good frontline CV. The most survivable tank CV in the game, really. However, especially in 1 versus 1, it also has this kind of role of like being actually an aggressive heavy tank that you buy when you want to push a zone, an enemy out of a zone where you also don't have a CV yet. So you can use it for presence, for pushing, as well as, you know, defending that zone while capping it in 1. So if you want to get really technical, I guess you could say, you essentially get a 100-point TADU in a sense. In team games, it's of course a lot. You generally are not as aggressive with it because it's a huge ATGM magnet and stuff, and you have to expect stuff like high AP AT planes a lot more, like basically all the time. You have to consider, unless of course you know that you killed all of them already. You have to take into account, or you always have to be on the edge when it comes to protecting your tanks because of incomes, etc. So that's why it is in such a unique role. Though I would not put it in S tier. It is very unique, so I guess it's really alone in this tier, or like in all the tier lists when it comes to its role, for the most part. But it is still very, very expensive, requires a lot of skill, and even then, it's just not always good, because depending on what you play against, this might just be overkill anyway. There are decks, mech decks and on certain maps where you don't really want to buy these heavy tanks because it's such a huge point sink, while, especially on stuff like held in a very small place, very often not really covering a lot of ground, where you would just rather have like more cheap units. But on the other hand, it can just transform the whole game plan and the whole way the match is being played on its own. Especially if your enemy has no AT planes left, most notably, you can really actually know that in a 1 versus 1. if you count what planes he has, they have what planes you killed. Now, if you kill 2 peace shrines, you saw the KWS, a seed, an IDS, and a different kind of ASFs. You know, they have 5 cards, and you kill 2 peace shrines, means they have no ATGM planes left, right? In Eurocore, for example. Yeah. And then, of course, this becomes a lot more easy to have survive. Bonbu. Infantry CV. Infantry CV is what I'll be putting under an umbrella term of infantry CV. Honestly, straight up A tier, all of them. And honestly, it doesn't really matter what transports have access to. You know, sure, some of them have MR17s, and then most of the time you will want to take them in an MR17 or MTV or Lynx H7 or Panther. But even if they only have a basic transport like this, they're still A tier. They're most of the time very survivable. They're sneaky. They're fast. And also sneaky. And if you bring them in a ground transport, they're also very sneaky into like getting into position, because you can put them into many positions, meaning that if the enemy would have line of sight on everything and know exactly when the transport stands still and where it stands still to really know where it is, you can put them in bushes, in towns, even in the open field if it's a big zone where it's unlikely that the enemy has recon close by or can get recon close by. You know what? No, I'll put them. No, A tier is fine. And I'll show you in a second why they're not quite worthy S tier, or what is worthy in S tier. B tier 50, I'm not a fan of them. They're slow and only have 2 front armor. They cost 100 points, but they still have the availability of an IV. They only get 4 per card. I'm like very certain. This is unfortunate that you can't see this when you're building a deck because of prototypes. That you can't see them in the armory, but yeah, you still gonna get 4 of them. If you got 6 of them, I think that'd be much, much better. But getting only 4 of them, well, I guess we can also just... I'll keep infantry turn on for now in case I forget a certain one that has like maybe a unique transport. But, getting only 4 per card, and they're not really that survivable. Yes, they have 2 front armor and 10 HP, but they're also so goddamn slow. So it's basically impossible to unless you park them on a road and have them look the right way, then it's so hard to dodge a bomber. I know some people I think Putin used them, maybe still does. Maybe I think CVs is one of the things where since I virtually never use them, right? I can't rate them that easily. So sometimes there's units where maybe just because I never use them, I rate them completely wrong or wrongly. But I think this is really not a good CV. Honestly, in this case, I'd probably rather use a Jeep CV. BMP1, the same as the Soviet one. Yes, you save 5 points without the Malyutka, and you get a 10 RPM Grom. But yeah, and we have another one. We have T55 CV. I don't like them because for one they have only 1 top armor and 2 rear armor, which isn't very high for a tank. Then you might say, but Razzmann, the BMDs, they have 2 front, 2 side, and 1 top, 1 rear, and you still think they're decent. Yes, but they also have higher availability. T55 being a tank CV, you only get 3 of them. Unless you play a deck with availability bonus, but all the meta decks that contain CSSR units don't have that availability bonus. So, yeah. The gun is virtually useless. The armor, you got good top armor and 3 side and 2 rear. Like, you will survive some HE shells, but also it's not particularly fast with only 50 kmh. And once again, being only 3 per card, it is too squishy to be 3 per card. Because with 3 per card CVs, outside of high availability bonus decks, 3 per card CVs, if you run a 3 per card CV, you will probably have to have at least one high availability CV or 2 other low availability CVs, right? And this being your only low availability CV means that it's probably supposed to be a survivable one. But the T55 for the availability is not very survivable. I hope you understand what I mean. T72 M1K, not really too different from the T72K1. It's just a T72M instead of the base one, so you pay more for better armor, most notably side. You pay more for a better gun, front armor. You know, that's really it. 10 points not a huge deal since you only get 3 of them. But of course, if you want to start with the tank suite, then every point counts, which is why you might prefer the cheap one. Whoopsie. Command squad, another standard CV of those. Sultan, it has 2 front, 2 side, and is fairly fast. Not amphibious, but you know, for 130 points, it is kind of pricey. But you know, 2 front, 2 side is not too bad. Warrior, the thing is, it has, okay, the Rarden is not amazing, but it will protect you against like infantry that tries to cross the open field. It might be just enough to, you know, kill like a helicopter that's like damaged already, at least with some armament, you know, unless it's like a full-on hind or something that will just one-shot you with an ATGM. So some armament is decent, and you know, 3 front, 3 sides, you know, is better than 2 front, 2 sides. So, you know, the points are kind of justified. Chieftain is honestly one of the better tank CVs. Yes, it is fairly slow, but 14 front, 8 side, 4 rear, 3 top. It takes a lot of HE to bring that one down. It has happened to me, but this is one of the tankiest CVs, especially when it comes to the price. It's really, really tanky, right? Compared to the T72. You lose side, you lose rear, you lose top. Especially the fact that you gain 1 armor on the low HE, low armor parts, mean that really, really helps your survivability. Top not so much, although against clusters very much so. Of course, top also helps against laser guided bombs that hit you directly, but generally I think CVs, when they get spotted, you know, like most of them when they die to HEs when they are not spotted by artillery and then get killed by artillery. But the chieftain, you know, ideally you'd either get price decrease with a weaker gun, or a weaker gun and higher speed for the same price. But it's certainly one of the better. I don't think it's quite A-tier worthy, because the speed, of course, is still not that great. But for 160 points, you get a pretty survivable CV. USC, it's just a Jeep CV. SPW60S. For 130, just 1 armor. KPVT knows at least some self defense, but only the base one for 10%. And for 130 points, this is rough to justify. Unless I only want to buy 2 CVs and want an infantry CV as well, then I would probably choose a cheap CV over this. But other than that, yeah, most of the time I don't know if I would pick. There's a lot of situations where I put this over a cheap CV. Dude, I have to say, dude, ranking CVs is actually the toughest thing. Maybe I am ranking them all a bit too low. Well, many of them. But I'm honestly not a fan. I do run 1 armor wheel CVs, even with no armament over cheap CVs very often. But because I just try to avoid CVs cheap CVs as much as possible. But I think 130 points with no additional armor. Standard infantry CV. Although this isn't really standard because this one's the only shock CV. So you get a shock MG, shock primary, and CQC on your MG as well. But I mean, that's relevant most of the time. It's still kind of funny though. T72K1, it's just another T72. The Führungspanzer, which means, I guess, leading tank or leader tank or command. Command tank is what it means, but the literal translation would be like the, you know, leading tank in that sense, or leader tank. Gas, it is one of the better GPCs because for 100 points you get 90 kmh compared to blue for 1, so for 100 points you get only 55. But in the end, it's just still a GPC. Not a fan, but yeah. Copa, it's 5 points cheaper than the SBW, and the Browning or the NSV might actually be better than the base KPVT. It's also faster off-road. But it's still, you know, it's one of those things. I really have to add another line here, because there's really few different roles of CVs. So that even though I predict there will be a lot of stuff in the D tier that you still see very often, but the reason is that when it comes to cheap, high availability CVs, nearly all of them are trash, and a few of them are just very good, and that just changes the ranking of them so much. But because there are just so many different roles due to availability differences, you still see D tier very often. So I will at the end maybe just write something down, maybe on video, maybe not. It is your standard infantry CV. Yes, if I had the choice, this one would be on the top of the list of infantry CVs I would choose, because the Panther is one of the best transports you get. 6 HP, fast, and rocket pods. But in the end of the day, I don't think this is what elevates the infantry CV into S tier. Because this is just a nice bonus, but doesn't suddenly make them so much better. Yeah, it's just not a 1 armor wheel CV. Hardbike is an infantry CV. Don't use this with the Merkava, please. Achzarit can be fine if you really worried about getting your CV sniped on the way there or something, but still, I'd just go for a wheel transport here. Same with this, same with that. Of course you get the links, but yeah. This is just a FIFU. I mean, I used the FIFU in a lot of my things, but you'll see it later. I might actually switch, and I thought about this for a while. I just haven't done it because I didn't play. Also, of course, driver glitching through. Why do they even have a driver when there's you can't even see through the glass on this model? Another one of these, not a Jeep CV. This is still only 1 armor. Though it is fast, and it's only 110, it is at least somewhat fast. But you still only get 4 per card. Again, if those basic IFVs, even if they've, or APCs, even if they've, I mean, technically they're not APCs because they don't really carry infantry, but if these command vehicles with low armor had at least 6 per card, that'd be a different thing. But not only do you pay more for it than a cheap CV, but the thing is just you get less, which is why nobody uses them. If they had 6 per card, you would see these basic, even if they have only 1 armor, these basic CVs a lot more often. This one is a different story. This is 2 front, 2 side, 2 rear, 2 top, 2 all around, a Browning for 130. You still get 4 per card. It is the dream. Before the Achzarit, this was probably one of my favorite vehicle CVs in the game. It's affordable, you get 4 per card, and it's fairly survivable. It's of course not amazing, you still take a good amount of damage if an M110 hits you directly, but you will survive it, guaranteed. You will survive even 2 shots, guaranteed, unless you get a crit, And that's great, that alone makes that thing just so much better than the basic 1 armor ones. Maybe it's B tier due to inflation with Achzarit and stuff, but we'll see in a bit. It's one of these things again. Once again, many of the vehicle series are just plagued by, not only do you have to pay for added survivability by price, but also availability. To a certain extent it makes sense, but when all you get is 1 armor, that doesn't really make you more survivable or take less damage than, let's say, the Humvee, which is also 6 per card but has 10 HP. Then why get them? You pay twice. When it comes to it just, yeah. I mean, there are the units where that obviously goes for a lot of units, but in this case, I don't know. Of course, every unit you pay higher price and you get lower availability. But CVs is something that you actually run out of fairly frequently. It's not very often that you get because in this case, right, when it comes to infantry, I'm sorry for derailing here, right? We look at Bochungs, they're 20 per card. That's 200 with a 5-point transport, right? That's 300 points per card. Canadian Airborne and the Grizzly, also 30 points. You get 14 of them. That's 420 points per card. So the per card value price wise is still very similar when it comes to higher cost other units. It's not the same with the CVs, right? You get 6 of these at 600. And you get 4 of these at 400. It's just that way of balancing stuff just doesn't work the way Eugen did it. all the time. You know, for some units it's of course fine, but just this is just such a massive difference. How much just one armor round just completely changes the unit. Anyway, once again, maybe I'm like somewhat inflating, you know, in the sense of like a lot of stuff that's in here, but deflating maybe I'm rating this too good and some of these too badly. We'll see. I think in this case, you know, I was gonna say that I'll do a video where I go over all of them again. In this case, maybe I'll do it at the end of the video, depending on how quickly we get through here. Because there's a lot of infantry CVs, as once again, yeah, you get a KH-29, you get the MTB, but I don't think that really transforms them into significantly better infantry CVs. Jeep CV, it has 2 front armor at least. Two front armor is certainly better than just 1 front armor. I'll put it in C tier for now, because I'm thinking that maybe I will rank up some of the stuff that is in D tier. But yeah, this is certainly, honestly, one of the better GPUs. This might actually be C tier because they're just so goddamn fast. Like no other, I don't think any other vehicle in the game is that fast off-road. Like we have the Hellcat with 100. We have some other stuff, I think, in the... Is it a capital? It's a capital, okay. In the vehicle, in like transports or something, that may be 110, but 120 I think is actually a new record. And I think this might actually be C tier just because of that. It's just one of those slightly better Jeeps. We have some code. Let's capitalize this. Yeah, I don't know. It's just 1 armor all around. I'd probably prefer this over Jeep CV if I can get away with 2 CVs, but yeah. Jeep CV, another M113 that's just as 1 armor. Centurion, some people like this. It's certainly, it is good, it is decent, right? Not a huge fan of this. Actually, I have the armor tool open. I can also check availability there. It's faster than... it's 3 cards still. It's goddamn slow, but 130 points for like decent all-round armor. I don't use it very often these days, especially not in Scandi, where you have better stuff available. But if you want cheapness and higher decent survivability, it's a good choice. It's just the main drawback is just, of course, the off-road speed, which means evading bombs. It's gonna be tough, and if you get hit at the rear, you're gonna take a lot of damage still. 2 front, but it's tracked. You know, at least the Dutch thing was wheeled, which is of course a bonus. But 2 front, 2 side, and this is the Germans have the same thing. This is actually what I was considering. I was considering the Fuchs FIFU to switch with the German version of this in my Launcher deck, because 2 front, 2 side. I'll also put them in the C tier, honestly. Even though I ran them fairly infrequently, I've come around to like value side armor a lot more these days when it comes to CVs, like 1 versus 2 side armor. Command M60. It's a solid tank. Only 4 side and 2 rear. So outside of the front, it's not that well armored against HE. You have to keep in mind, even if you have like 7 or 6 side armor, something like an F111 or Nighthawk, if it hits the side armor, it's still gonna take a shit ton of damage, right? So don't think just because you have 5 or 6 armor, you're suddenly immune to HE damage. Of course, you can still get hit on the top. Command Abrams. One of the better tanks, you know, compared to the Chieftain. You basically get speed for... You get 1 more front armor, but I think the extra side and rear armor is worth more than 1 extra bit of front armor. But you get a lot more speed. That means you can, of course, evade stuff a lot more. Your burst damage is lower, but against infantry you're going to be much better because higher rate of fire and 2 MGs, if it comes down to it. 6 versus 8, was it? 8 side armor. Matters against 20 and 21 HP. In these cases, you will get 1 shot to the side, whereas the Chieftain will not. This, for example, the Spike, which honestly is not that common on tank CVs, but can be, for example, the Specialnie Jednotki or the Spetsnaz AT weapon, can be the Carl Gustav M3 on Jäger the 90, and the previous two, I said Specialny and Spetsnaz. So there are some weapons where a chieftain would survive a side shot and Abrams not. But I don't think that's too common. I think if something gets there next to the chieftain, the chieftain's probably dead anyway. But I think it's an interesting trade-off. I would personally probably choose the Abrams over the chieftain if I had the choice. But it's not often you have the choice. Jeep CV, Humvee. Once again, you get 5 extra HP compared to other CVs, and you retain that 6 per card based availability. And you get a Browning, which is essentially for free if you compare to 100 other 110 point CVs. Of course, you tend to be slower than most of them, but I think the only other 90 kmh GCV is the gas used by Finland, and that's 100. But like 110 point ones tend to be 110 kmh, or in the case of the Yugoslav 120, you're still very fast, but you have essentially twice the HP pool, right? An M110 shot will not kill you. A direct M110 shot will kill you, but like an indirect one, you might survive, or like one that doesn't hit you very closely. You will survive 7 HE artillery. You can survive a Eurogun shot if you're lucky. Of course, direct HE artillery will kill you just as fast. But again, 10 HP Browning, which no other cheap CV has, no other 6 base availability CV has, as far as I know, like any kind of weaponry, for essentially free. And that is actually huge, believe it or not. And that's why I'll put it here. Which doesn't mean that you will, Putin still takes, as far as I know, the LAV over it. But, yeah, speaking of, once again, maybe I'll rate all those. I mean, yeah. The thing is, if you can afford to take 3 cards of CVs, then yes, I'll probably choose the LAV over the Humvee. But if I can only afford to take 2 cards of CVs, then I'll gladly take the Humvee and I'll be happy, and like an Abrams or an infantry CV, and I'll think, it's not the most survivable, but it's a lot more survivable than something like this, Once again, I'll take a look at this at the end. It's just another cheap CV. BTR 40 Pikud. It has 0 top armor, which is mostly irrelevant, but it's 115 for essentially 1 armor round, and a Browning. But still only 4 per card. Again, this 4 per card doesn't matter all the time. In Israel gets enough availability that I think you get 5 of them, if I'm not wrong. Let me actually check. What's the Israel availability bonus? 10%, so you don't. Yeah, you still only get 4 per card. But are they really still D tier? Once again, maybe I'm rating them all too low, but I'll just keep going for now. I think you just have to keep in mind, once again, D tier doesn't mean horrible, D tier just means you don't get anything better. Jeep CV, Grizzly, same thing. Same procedure as every year, James. M577, one of these again. But I think, oh yeah, Leopard CV is new. I think it's still C tier because it's decently survivable. But the big downside of Leopard CVs is they have okay front armor, like acceptable, but they really lack side and rear armor. Most notably side. Rear, 2 rear or 3 rear is not that uncommon, but like 3 side armor for tank CV of that price, like if you compare this to T72 CV, right? Like 6 versus 3, that's huge, right? So isn't as survivable against the HE artillery, which is the most common artillery, as other CVs. But in a pinch, it is certainly a lot more. You're not gonna lose it to like some random mortar salvo like you will a Jeep CV. M577. Another M48. I really don't think they're very good. But I mean, that's probably why you never see any of them. Another M577. And another Command Leopard. More M577s. and another command leopard. Leopard 2. One of the most, I think, might be a second most expensive tank CV now that I think about it. Not necessarily the second most survivable. Actually, it might be. Actually, same armor as M1 Abrams, just more rear armor. I wouldn't. I mean, the Abrams is, I think, still like on the edge of. I mean, I guess you can still use it in a 1v1, but I would not recommend using this if you only run 2 CVs. In which case, I'll probably go for the Leopard 1. 170 is quite a hefty price for a tank that, you know, it has a decent gun, but it's not that great in defending itself, right? It will lose one-on-one against basically every other medium. I mean, it's gonna be, it's an alright tank to me, right? It's just more of a, I mean, it's a good frontline tank speed, but certainly more of a team game pick. GPCV Hayate is actually also a Humvee, but without a Browning. And believe it or not, I think in this case the Browning actually makes a big deal. Don't underestimate Brownings when it comes to like helicopters flying over you. If you're sitting in a bush and an M8 MTV or MIT or something like that flies over you because of FMGs, the rocket pods might not be able to shoot at you, but the MG will. Their 150 cal will. And in that case, the Humvee will either be able to kill it or at least stun and panic and then make it like not get proper shots off. And believe it or not, in this case, yes, the Browning makes a difference of a whole tier. I'm not joking. This ranking of CVs is something else. Mugav, I actually didn't know this existed, but you know, here we are. Someone tell me what it means or what it stands for. Achzarit Pikud, I don't think I need to explain you why. Easy S tier. Easy S tier. Freaking 10 front, 6 side, 5 rear, 2 top for 130 points and 4 availability. Better armor than bunch of tanks. He's like, well, look at this. Like, look, compare this to the Centurion, right? Better armor than the Centurion. The Centurion is slower and slower availability. Yeah, I mean, yes, you get a gun, but who cares about the gun when you're slower? And you get like 1 more per card, dude. This is ridiculous. It's just bullshit that this exists for what, like, with this availability and this price. It's just bullshit. That's what it is. Merkava 1. Accidentally opened something. It's like a worse Abrams, really. I mean, you get essentially the same gun. You get worse side armor, more front armor, you're slower. But it's still an okay tank to me. 5 side armor is still acceptable. Like, still tanky against HE. 907 Shiki CV is one of those 1 armor once again. Nanayon Shiki CV, once again, not a fan. 1 back, 1 top. This is one of the most squishy. It's like just as squishy as the M41s, right? The M41s, they also have 1 rear. Yeah, they also have 1 rear. So I guess it's actually more survivable because it has 1 more front. But yeah, not a fan at all. It wrote VC instead of CV. P4 is a Jeep CV, VAB, you know the drill. AMX 30B. It does have an autocannon, which while it isn't able to fire it at the same time as the gun, most of the time, if you're defending yourself, it's against either infantry or helicopters, but very often helicopters, in which case this actually comes into play against your frontline AMX 40s or something. You will virtually never be able to use your autocannon unless you're microing the gun, turn it off just after you fired, etc. So honestly, I'm really not a fan of this, but I think the autocannon actually kind of helps it. I never ran it in the past, and I probably still never will, not even in Eurocore. I would probably still prefer the Leopard. I mean, the Leopard also only has 3 side armor, right? And 1 top is... I think I used to really I guess these days the top armor just doesn't really matter as much as it used to in the past when you saw cluster armors in general a lot more, and you saw laser guided bombs a whole lot more. So these days the top armor for 1v1 doesn't matter as much anymore, and for team games I'd probably just use Leopard 2 anyway. GMCB Aslev, I mean, it does have 2 front to side, which is nice, but it's 140 points. Like, holy fuck. This is just so expensive for something that isn't even that survivable. I mean, sure, you know, you don't buy 10 CVs, you don't buy a maximum of 4, or I guess 5, or maybe even 6 in ANSEC. But I mean, the thing is also you might want to open with one, and then you pay like 30-40 points extra. It's like 2 infantry squads maybe. Like, usually I'm like on the when it comes to like expensive unit pricing, I'm like, you know, if it's like 140, 130, if you buy 2 or 3 of them in a game, it's not a big of a deal. But I think in 1v1s or CVs, it's like something that should cost 120, you know? I mean, being 4 per card, not that big of a deal. Like 2 front to side is nice on a wheel transport. But like 140? Bruh. It's just so expensive. Right? You can get a fucking tank. You can get the Achzarit for this instead of 10 points left over. What is this, Eugen? What is this? Like, this is tough, dude. Oh, on it? No, fuck this. This is D tier. Who pays 140 points for something like this, dude? I might actually rather take a GCV, because then at least I have high availability. Like 140 points for something like this? Please, GCV. This is actually a lot more. Oh, that's a 5, not a 1, and not an S. I said, oh, that's 105. Jeez, this font, dude. The GCV XA, I mean, same thing here. At least you get a Browning. But you're not amphibious anymore. Like 140? Jesus. Like, once again, I completely understand the point if someone's saying we buy a maximum of 4. I mean, that's 40 to 80 points per game, depending on how you look at it. But again, if you buy this in the opener, if you buy 2 of them in the opener, it's, you know, 20 to 40 points gone for nothing. And the 1v1 in the opener, that can make a big difference. It's 2 infantry squads, maybe even 3, depending on what deck you have, you know? Nearly 3, so... I'm getting worked up over this, holy moly. One of these B tier 50s again. VP2 is honestly not that horrible. I don't use it very often or at all. But like 4 front is nice, 2 side. You have an acceptable autocannon for self defense. It's decently fast, it's amphibious, you know, got at least something going for it. Infantry CVs. In the past, I was like, yeah, dude, you got like 1-5 points and that high off-road speed. These days, like, whatever, dude. It's just a cheap CP. Honestly, this isn't even that horrible. You got a 4 front, 2 side. One of the worst autocannons in the game, if not the worst. Might actually be the worst. But, you know, it's 4 front, 2 side. And it is an autocannon, right? And sometimes just having a gun can make all the difference for CVs. You know, again, if like a single helicopter or something flies through. And even if they don't actually kill or deal damage, the fact that they're shooting something can actually notify you, oh shit, my CV is shooting, why is that? And then actually see that you have something spotted there. Or hear shooting it even. This is certainly one of the best CVs as well. 4 per card, good armor, affordable. It has an MG. This is a dummy gun for everyone saying, hey, it should be an autocannon. No, it's intentional. It's a dummy gun. It's supposed to look like an IFV, so it doesn't, you know, give away that it's actually a command unit. It is actually intentional, believe it or not. Same with the reconversion. But yeah, good survivability. 4 per card, very affordable. Not, you know, consider this. Would you rather have 5 extra front, 3 extra side, and like what I think 1 extra rear armor, or this MG? I take the armor. Oh, it's actually fucking 3 extra rear armor. This thing is fucking bullshit. Fuck the Achzarit. Fuck some of the DLC units. Fucking hell, Eugen. Fuck the Achzarit just actually is. This is actually one of the. I feel like this is the most interesting infantry CV because you get this autocannon vehicle with it, which is actually really nice base defense. Honestly, I think this is the closest contender to an S tier infantry CV. Because once again, you get the base defense for the same at the same time, you know. Another tank CV. It's a solid one, 150 points, 3 per card. Has acceptable armor. No turret means that it has to turn to shoot. Which is not really a huge difference, honestly. But you know, it is very survivable. Infantry CV looks like Mad. T55 CV without medium optics, so it's the worst T55 CV. Even not even poor optics, it has bad optics, which is the worst you can have. T72 CV, T72. Shouldn't this be a T72M? Wait, what kind of T7? This is a T72 M1? Wait, hold on. Is this? Do you smell this? Is this DLC bullshit? No, it's not. This is actually an M1 CV, not an MCV. Never mind. I thought the other ones were T72 Ms for 160 points, but they're actually M1s. So yeah, I guess this should technically be called a T72 M1 Copa. But it wouldn't be the first time that Eugen fucked up something for cheap CVs or any kind of DLC units. Sorry, I mean, or any units in general. But you know, MA4 CV, 10 extra points, you get a bit more survivability. Whoopsie, there we go. You're faster, which is nice, and you get like if an enemy tank like comes into range of this, especially in forests, the enemy tank might actually be in more danger than the M84. Though honestly, most of the time, if it happens, there's not just a tank, but a lot more coming at you. But still, only 3 rear and 2 top. Honestly, not the biggest fan of this. For a tank CV for 170 points, not that survivable. I guess, how does it compare to the Leopard 2? Maybe just... I mean, I guess the Leopard 2 only has 6 side, but also more rear and more top. I think I'd still go for the Leopard. Like, especially the rear and top armor. Fine, I'll accept it. It's actually not that bad. I guess also the fact that it's not just a gun, but like an dangerous gun, is also counts for something. Topaz, so it has only 1 armor. Okay. Are they supposed to have only 1 armor? Like the normal Topaz 2A. Or Topaz or Topaz or whatever has 2 armor. There it is. 2. Yeah, this is either a fuck up by Eugen or the Poles did something weird to their Topaz CV so it has less armor. So it's maybe lighter or carry more or something like that. More space, what do I know? Intentional or not. I mean, there's this weird recoilless rifle, but who cares? Another T55 CV. Dude, this is one of the most like D tier heavy. Like, look at this. 1 in S tier, 4 in A tier, and so many in D tier. But I think, honestly, the more I think about it, maybe I'm not gonna change all those 1 armor wheel things. I think this maybe goes to show most decks just don't have those fancy CVs, It's not a T72. And of course, like I said, this is mostly a 1 versus 1 dilemma, really. 1 versus 1 deck dilemma. The availability can make a huge difference. And, I think if I was playing a team game, I would never use a Jeep CV over, let's say, 110 point or 120 point wheeled transport with a wheel thing with 1 armor and 10 HP. But in 1 versus 1 decks, that's a huge difference. Jeep CV, you have 2 front, 2 side, so you may enter the C tier club. John Maho. I mean, honestly, not too bad for 120 points. Not that fast, but there's a KPVT. There's 6 front, 4 side, 2 rear. But for 120 points, once again, if it wasn't for being 3 per card, this thing would be quite nice. I mean, it's still decent, but like cheap CV, BRDM. And the 70k as well, because there's only 2 front but not 2 side. And the early KPVT. If this was a BTR 80 CV, it also has 2 side and the late KPVT, and wouldn't cost like 150 points, which no Eugen it probably would, might not be too bad. Jeep CV, this is just like an OT64, but without the gun. What are those names, dude? And the next one is just the same, but you got the KPVT for 15 points, dude. Like on the vehicle you pay 5, on the CV you pay 15 points, which I can understand, but like it's fucking KPVT, dude. Infantry CV. This is one of the worst ones because not only does it only have 1 armor, but also slow as fuck. It's just like the Topaz, I guess. What are all these garbage? It's cheap CV, it's Scott, just like an OT64. So now we're getting into the real boring territory, I guess. 2 front, 2 side, 50 cal. Then why does it cost less than? Oh, come on, Eugen. Hold on a second there. Let me finish typing this bullshit. There's like just look at this. Just look at this. No, for 5 points less, you gain. Okay, you lose optics. Granted, but honestly, if I had to guess, it's fucking inconsistency that Eugen forgot to fix, because virtually every CV gets medium optics except for some DLC ones. So and I'm very confident in this. Let's consider that it has medium optics for the sake of what Eugen did here, and they probably just forgot about the optics when they copied the stats over from the IFE, if I had to guess. In any case, you gain 5 speed, you gain better fuel efficiency, which is completely irrelevant on the CV, but just to rub it in. You're faster in water. And you get a 50 cal, which on CV is, again, not to be underestimated or undervalued. And you cost less. Come on, Eugen. And of course, this goes for all the 2 front, 2 side, and 1 rest armor CVs. Dude, who would have guessed that the tab that I get the most annoyed about Eugen's balancing and inconsistency is the fucking logistics tab? I don't know, maybe someone would have guessed it, but I wouldn't have. Infantry CV. Is this? I haven't checked the scene. Is this all up and running again? Yeah, you can see this. I don't want to do another like 1 hour recording and then I forgot to make the tier list visible or something. This is not D tier. What am I doing? This is C tier. You can come into the somewhat cool boys club. ZZZ, that's actually a good tank CV. It's cheap, decent armor all around. 3 per card. My favorite armored CV in Red Dragons, but it's still 3 per card. And the main reason why it's just seen so often, relatively speaking, seen so often in Red Dragons, is because in Red Dragons you get an availability bonus, you get 4 of them. If this was available in other decks, you probably still see like maybe this plus a Jeep CV in some decks, which is like fairly common, like 1 Jeep CV, 1 survivable, although I wouldn't recommend it these days anymore. But in decks without availability bonus, not that often anymore. Okay, we're through all CVs. Okay, good, because we don't have a lot of time left, because now it's just this the supply units. Let's actually just turn these off. So, first of all, supply helicopters. They have their role, but they're just, especially the early ones, are so cost inefficient. Like for 25 points, you are less efficient than 20 points supply truck. The thing about, sometimes people say, oh, you're so much faster. You can make a supply chain, blah, blah, blah. Well, okay. On huge maps, let's say floods, Cold War Sea, yes, they can be useful. And yes, you are significantly faster. On most maps, even bigger ones, like on the huge, like really huge maps, or if you're playing like mixed maps, yes, supply healers will be very, very useful. I agree. Unless, of course, there's like 2 or 3 spawns, and then in the case that argument is smooth, it's like straight to the point. Maybe, for example, if you capture the spawn. But in most maps, and even in big ones sometimes, again, depending on spawn, you're not actually that much faster. Why? Well, for one, there's the landing speed, there's the takeoff speed, blah, blah, blah. But, and this is the most important point, and that's also a negative that is really, can be really annoying even on the massive maps or mixed maps, you just can't be nearly enough close to the front line as you can with a GPCV. A GPCV you can drive through forest, drive through a town, it's gonna be hidden or very rarely been spotted. Park it where it's not spotted, and then resupply units just at the front line, because units at the front line will most likely be in cover anyways, or they should. You can't do that with a helicopter CV. It's very easy to spot. You can't hide it in the forest, or you can hide it in the town, but the enemy will see exactly where it lands. So if it's close to the front line, there's also a good chance it will, if you try to land there, it will just be shot down. And of course, it will very, very easily be spotted in the first place. Even if it's not directly spotted where it landed. So parking in the front line is virtually impossible, which means you have to park it behind the front line, which means that either you have to move your units back, or you have to have a supply truck nearby that you first resupply at the helicopter, then drive back to the front line, which means you will need 2 different units in your logistics hub and buy 2 different units to manage this shit. It's just, and that also explains the whole, supply chain thing. It's not even that much faster supply chain, again, outside of the very, very big maps, because you have to buy 2 different units. You have to micromanage them. They have to sit there and resupply anyway. It's so much hassle for such little value. And once again, if the trucks just fast move, they're not even that much slower. And that's why, honestly, every supply helo, none of them will be easier, because once again, there are situations where they'll be useful, but on most maps they would be easier. But just for these niche scenarios, it means they will be easier, because again, sometimes you will need to roll. But every supply helo is less than 75 points. I will just rate supply trucks based on the price. So let's do supply helos first. So what are we left with? 75 points and 110 points. 75 points supply trucks, supply helos, they have a roll. They're still, point for point, not as efficient as, let's say, a Hemd. A Hemd for 40 points gives you 2400 supply, or a 40 point supply vehicle gives you 2400, if I'm not wrong. Let's actually just check that real quick. 2400, yes. So they're still not as efficient, but like not as bad as the 25 point ones, for example. But once again, huge supply, especially in team games, they have their role. And then of course we have the MR26, which it is quite literally unique, because there's no other helicopter like this. With 6,000 supply for 110 points, that is quite a lot of value. I think you get 2 per card. You get 2 per card, yes. You definitely don't pack this close to the front line. It's like a huge, it's so easy to kill for what it costs, and so hard to hide as well. But I think there are certainly, I could if you're playing a relatively light Soviet deck, or Red 4 deck, I suppose. Very in some games I just never need a lot of supply. In other games I will need some supply, but I never really end up using my full fob anyway. You might want this, because the main drawback of a fob is losing the 75 points in the opening. If you could buy the fob at any point in the game, everyone would run fobs in 1 versus 1. But the reason why sometimes people don't do that is because losing the 75 points in the opening, which again, points in the opening are very, very valuable. But with the MR26, you essentially have the option to not have to buy the fob in the opening, and instead buy a less efficient fob later on in the game, right? You can use the extra opening points to get into the winning position. And once you're in the winning position, you can afford to, you know, pay stuff that doesn't really directly or very fast affect, you know, the outcome of the game. So in these situations, you might want to run MI26. Of course, the Soviet deck, if you try hard with it, is very supply intensive, so you want the fob. But we don't just rate units based on the decks that are available. And, you know, in other decks, they, you know, for example, in Red Dragons deck might really like this, because Red Dragons, the BM24s are really the only supply heavy unit. But even then, compared to other artillery, they're not even that supply heavy. Because you can sort of even get away just running 2 supply trucks. But, you know, Red Dragons might run like MI26 in a supply truck, and then later on in the game, when you have like when you really want to use a lot of PM24s, or you have to resupply them a lot, or you have a lot of empty supply trucks, then you might want to buy an MI26, and the one might even just be enough for Red Dragons. Yeah. Vehicles. Okay. I mean, for one, I will rate them the same as any kind of 10-point vehicle, because they're actually even, you know what? No. E tier, 10 points trucked, or tracked, I should say. Tracked supply unit vehicles. Like, yes, they're armored. Yes, they're amphibious, but just the fact that they're so much slower at the front line is really, really annoying. You know what? Let me rephrase that. 10 points. No, that's wrong. That's wrong. No, they're not E tier. Because if it's the only thing available, then you would still want to use them. 10 points supply vehicles. Easily the worst ones. Why? They're so goddamn slow off-road. 50 kmh. Let me actually... Yes, and again, the same penalty as... like 5-point trucks, right? So they're incredibly slow off-road and even slower in the forests, and it makes them just so goddamn slow. And I'm just quickly checked. I believe I'm checking the armory, because I'll tell you in just a second. I'm checking the mobility type of the supply trucks. So the Stalwart, for example, I believe, yeah, doesn't really get that huge speed penalty. Before we actually rate them, I need to check this, because I don't know this off the top of my head. The Fabs both get that big speed penalty. The HLVW does not. The Oshkosh, oh, I mistyped, does not. The Kolos does not. Unless I'm misreading this, but SM150 does. The MIN does not. The Jupiter does. Yeah, but of course, massive speed penalty, plus being wheeled, plus having low off-road speed. If you have to just move like through a small forest, it just slows them down so massively. That's why I hate them so much. 15 points honestly aren't much better, but you know, they're a bit better. This is of course more subjective than others. I think 20 points is my favorite one. Because they're the best trade-off between like speed, which, you know, highly correlates with the price, as well as the supply they carry, as well as supply per point, right? The more expensive you get, the more supply you get per point, and also the more supply you carry per unit, but also, you know, faster you are. I guess supply per unit and supply per point in this case is the exact same thing in the end. Yeah, I think the ideal trade-off. So it's just that, you know, they're fast, they carry a good amount of supply, but at the same time, if you just want to supply 80 GM on your flank or something, you don't have to pay like 40 points or something to do that, you know, which sometimes is why I don't really like just running 40-point supply trucks. Then we have the 30-point ones, which honestly are just a tad worse for me, but in other times I much prefer them. especially if I don't run a FOB or something, then these are my favorite ones, because once again, compared to 40-point ones, they're just more affordable just buy for another front. And all of them don't get that speed penalty for off-road as 5-point trucks would, so they're not as much affected by going through forest or something. 40-point supply trucks, not a fan. I mean, this one is just cheating because I get more per card, but I'm gonna, yeah. 40-point supply trucks are just so expensive, right? So if you just want to supply a thing near the front line, and that's why they're only B tier. I mean, they're gonna be fast. They have 10 HP generally, which is nice, so that they don't get instantly killed by artillery. So the 10 versus 5 HP also, you know, once you get to the 30 point, you get a 10 HP, and especially against mortars, like if you're, or like artillery or something, that actually really helps. And of course, you get so few per card compared to the low HP on low point ones that you really want them to survive as well. But I think 30 point and 20 point ones are the best ones easily. The 10 and 15 point ones, especially the 10 points ones, are just horrible. And of course, we have the FOBs, which are all identical. Surprised that I didn't fuck up any of the DLC FOBs. Just kidding, it's literally just copy and pasting. Not even Newton would fuck that up. I think just A tier. In the past, you know, a few years ago, if you had asked me, I probably would have said like B or C tier. But with just artillery or indirect fire support just being so much more valuable and important, so did the FOB become so much more important. You know, I would even argue it's S tier for team games, but then it also somewhat depends on it. Like if you're playing like motorized or something that's really not supply heavy and doesn't run any heavy artillery, then you don't really care about FOBs. Although then you might care about it for like your rocket pot helicopters. But yeah, I'm gonna put it in A tier for now. I don't think it's S tier. For some decks it's S tier, for others it's not. But you know, we don't do this on a deck by deck basis. I think that's all logistics units. I was gonna say that I'm gonna write something down here. I mean, I guess this goes for every tab, but I think this one is more noticeable. Just like any other tabs, units here have their own role. This might still be better to run a CV from the D tier than it is to run one from the B tier. For example, due to availability. This is, I think, most notably in 1v1s. I said this a few times throughout the video. The whole availability thing, I think, is of very little relevance in team games, which is why I very much dislike running Jeep CVs in 1v1s. And I really try to not run Jeep CVs, and that sometimes means I have to run 3 CVs for availability purposes, but sometimes it's just a price I'm willing to pay. But again, there are situations or some decks, you know, where I'm like, okay, sure, I hate it, but I'm gonna run a Jeep CV because I can't afford to pay the activation points for 3 cards of CVs. But generally speaking, in 1v1s, I recommend not to, but sometimes you have no choice. In team games, if I see you run a Jeep CV, there's no excuse. You don't need this many CVs. Even if you run just a single card, it's fine if you run 4 CVs, because virtually, you know, of course, if you're playing a 2v2 and both of you only run 4 CVs and you're playing on a big map, then of course, yes, you might run into issues. But for one, virtually nobody runs only 1 CVs. You know, most people run 2. But if you run 2, that's just run like an infantry CV and a tank CV. That's good enough. Even if, you know, you have no infantry CVs left and you need to buy a CV because your teammate can't or something for like a not frontline zone, then whatever, just pay the 150, 160 points for a tank CV. That's not a huge deal in a team game. But just do not run cheap CVs in team games, you know? you don't need that availability. And you know, in team games, once again, that these 10 extra points are even less valuable than you save. Yeah, that's all I have to say. Stop running cheap CVs. In 1 versus 1s, it can be acceptable sometimes, but in general, in team games, if I see you run cheap CVs, I'll hate you. I'll hate you. That's all I have to say. And that's logistics a lot more infuriating than I expected it. I think at this point I think I'm content with having all those, you know, 1 armor APC CVs in the D tier once again. Even though the ASLF is like 2 front, 2 side, but if 140 points, Jesus, no. But you know, depending on, you know, if someone has some feedback in the comments, and maybe I change my mind or something if you can convince me. I think this is one of the easiest things to convince me to change my mind on something. But I think it makes sense because not everyone has access to A, B, or C tier. Because I think if anyone, any decks had access to the Achzarit, anyone would run it. Of course, it's S tier. If any deck has had access to the K2777, I think every deck, unless of course Israel or something, or you know, stuff that has access to other similar good stuff, would run that plus Infantry CV or the S tier IB Strip BV90. You know, I think it just shows that most decks just don't have any extraordinary cheap CVs. Most of these 4 and 6 per card CVs just are virtually the same thing with just a different coat of paint. I mean, like many units, quite literally, but I think, yeah, this shows it even more. In any case, that's logistics done. I guess next up we'll do tank. I don't want to do another boring one like helicopters or something, because I think helicopters will not really be that interesting the next time. And yeah, hopefully you enjoyed it anyway, even though it was probably the most boring tab. And I'll hopefully see you next time.